Hello, everybody. It's 2026. Hopefully, this is working. I've never streamed using my laptop before. Perhaps I shouldn't have it on my lap so that I don't, whenever I jiggle and move, I don't shake the whole thing. But I guess I can be mostly still, right? Maybe? No, I guess that's not going to work out. Well, there, I can put it a little farther back. Hopefully, there won't be too much sunlight all over me. Um, yeah, that works. That works out. Well, I just wanted to stream real quick and say that I'm planning on streaming more in 2026 and talking about games and that kind of thing, and streaming on a more regular schedule, and hopefully wherever I'm at, I can stream now that I've figured out the laptop situation and streaming with a laptop and on the go. I'm actually using a mobile streaming app right now, so I can actually stream using my phone in the future, which would be great because then I could just chat about my thoughts about this, that, and the other thing without having to, always be at home when doing that. Um, as far as if this works, I guess I'll find out in a bit if it actually works out or not when I go check my logs and see if this is actually being recorded, which is fine. Otherwise, I'll just upload it to YouTube if somehow I failed on some technical level or something. It's possible. But mostly, I want to talk about not just my streaming schedule, but what I'm planning to do in the future for with my Patreon, and what I'm planning to do with my upcoming RPG books that I have planned to make hopefully by the end of 2026, and that I'm also working on an original game, so something not World of Darkness related or Urban Shadows related or Dune related or anything like that, or the other games I've worked on, just an original creation of my own. That has been kind of in the works for quite a while. I've had several original game kind of concepts, but I think I've settled on one that I plan on developing in greater detail in the future. What I would say though, as far as my streaming schedule goes, I think what I'm basically going to do is continue with my schedule streaming on Wednesday evenings, Thursday and Friday mornings, and Monday mornings as well. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I'll see about streaming in the morning, but my schedule's a little more difficult on those days, just because I'm out and about on those days. I'm not necessarily at home at that time. I'm elsewhere, so I'll see if that's still possible to stream there more regularly, but otherwise, it looks like it's going to continue to be Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, Wednesday evenings. And maybe Wednesday evening, I'm planning on doing something more, game playing related, like checking out either games that I'm interested in, video games in particular, but also RPGs. Either show you games like I showed Praxis, the runner-up for the Vampire Game Jam not too long ago, which I think is a fantastic game. Hopefully, I can actually speak to the creator of Praxis, maybe online, not like as an interview, but just to chat and get their thoughts on the game and what they're working on now, that kind of thing. I think it's a type of game that I really enjoy. And I wish there were more vampire-related games like that, but also just more games like that, period, whether they're based on vampire or not. I think vampire, is very conducive to that type of game, but I think they're different. There are lots of different games, IPs, even maybe original IP that could benefit from that kind of game. That kind of time management and resource management. It's a very interesting game type for me. I think it's very comparable to Dispatch, which obviously has a lot of buzz around it. I played the whole game. I thought it was fantastic. I think the writing for Dispatch was next level. Probably some of the best video game writing I've seen in years. Far better than most AAA games, actually, as far as the writing is concerned. In Dispatch, which is kind of crazy considering it's a pretty tight, small game. Dispatch. so that the writing was so phenomenal was very interesting. And of course, the voice work was very good in Dispatch. Not just Aaron Paul. I think everybody was, kind of on the same level as Aaron Paul. In fact, I'd say Aaron Paul, though probably a better actor overall than, some of the other people involved, perhaps. As far as a voice actor, I don't actually think he was as good as some of the other people there. And I just don't mean Matt Mercer, who obviously is a next level voice acting talent. I think there was a lot of, really good voice acting talent. Even though I hear there were a lot of influencers or streamers who did voice acting work in Dispatch. I didn't really see a lot of disconnect there. I think everybody did a fantastic job. I think there were like one or two where maybe they weren't as good as everybody else, or the audio quality was a little poorer for them. Perhaps that's because of the fact maybe they had to collect the voice. I know I've done voice acting work where they basically had to collect my voice in a separate situation than everybody else's. So so the quality and tenor maybe didn't match everybody else's. I noticed that in one or two places in Dispatch, but nonetheless, that kind of resource management game that's actually the gameplay loop in Dispatch outside of the incredible writing and the interesting story and all that. That play a loop of basically, managing your resources, sending the correct superhero at the right time and all that. I find it a very interesting gameplay loop and very satisfying for some reason. I like it a lot, which is kind of funny because in tabletop role-playing games, I actually find resource management to be tedious. I don't like it. I think in a video game, it's fun simply because a lot of it is automated. So the game itself is kind of calculating all the pushing of dots and points and what's getting spent and what's getting conserved and all that. Doing that at the table, whether you're talking about blood points or gold coins or any of that stuff, mana points or whatever, I find to be tedious and not fun. As I've said a million times in the past, V5's change to the blood pool system and hunger, the introduction of hunger dice and the hunger rating, I feel kind of revolutionized the game in a way it should have been changed, a decade previous. That kind of blood pool resource management is just such an artifact of very archaic game design, in my opinion. And so the hunger system not only streamlines that whole aspect of it, kind of gets rid of the resource management minigame completely. It also puts a bit of risk reward in the system itself, which is much more in tune to the thematics of Vampire, because hunger obviously no longer increases or decreases in this very controlled way. Like you're basically risking the increase in hunger. You never know, so it's a lot more gambling, and so that kind of risk reward system as a tool, I think is much better, much more thematic to Vampire's themes. I'm not quite sure that is as well developed in Werewolf per se, with the rage dice and the rage system there. When I worked on Werewolf, the 5th edition, I really wasn't really part of the mechanical team working on the rage system. I think what they settled on was very interesting. I think the way rage dice kind of works is interesting. But the whole rage meter and what it means and what it does is not as interesting. I personally find Werewolf in general as a game very fun. And I think the concepts it explores are great. But to be honest, it's not really the way I would portray werewolves. Personally, I think the main story fantasy and conceit of werewolf is that kind of this uncontrolled beast that's inside you. You don't know when you're going to change. The whole kind of story beat of a chained up werewolf, as it were, someone who just does not wish to change, is uncontrollable. I think is kind of the narrative heart of being a werewolf, and that's kind of absent from Werewolf as it's portrayed in the World of Darkness. which I feel is kind of a shame. I think Werewolf the Forsaken, that's the new WoD or Chronicle of Darkness version of Werewolf, tried to address that part of the fantasy of the werewolf narrative more head on. But I don't know if it completely succeeded. I think Werewolf Forsaken is a really interesting game. I think there are some story elements within it that are not very well developed and kind of counterintuitive. That you're basically playing that, werewolves are rare, but that you are playing this, subgroup of werewolves called the Forsaken is very weird. That would basically be like if Vampire the Masquerade was, you can only play Otarkus, right? Like there are all these other vampires in the world, and vampires, of course, there's only one vampire per how many, thousands people. But the only vampires you can play in the vampire game are Otarkus, are these independent vampires that are not part of the overall vampire society. So Werewolf the Forsaken kind of misses a beat there, in that we're supposed to believe that werewolves are rare, but that there are enough of them that 15 werewolves in a city are all Forsaken. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It kind of is counterintuitive, and of course, it also yet again bleeds into the werewolf as this kind of tribal society, as opposed to this curse or this bestial thing. Which isn't particularly my preferred take on werewolves. I much prefer the werewolf idea as something monstrous within you that escapes, and you no longer have control. You lose your humanity to it for brief moments, and the struggle against that. So it's kind of a more of a solitary personal experience, which is difficult to portray in a role-playing game. I think there are some role-playing games that tackle it in interesting ways. If I might be getting the title wrong, but I think it's called Love Bites. I'm not quite sure. It's kind of a feminist take on werewolves as a role-playing game. I'll look it up next time I stream and get it straight. But I remember I read it on the shelf at my local gaming store, Games and Stuff here in Maryland. It's kind of like, I think it's like the biggest gaming store on the East Coast. They have the Dark Crystal. They actually have the Dark Crystal from the Dark Crystal movie now. So it's a huge gaming store, and they have a big area of independent games. And I always check that out. The owner, Paul, is very connected into kind of the indie gaming space, and so I always know he's going to have some interesting stuff on the shelf as well. I think George, who also works there, an old friend of mine, kind of curates the space there. So they always have very interesting kind of indie games on the shelf. So I always check it out. And I remember I saw it. I think it was called Love Bites. And I think I even did a panel with the partner of the creator of that game. So I feel kind of embarrassed that I'm not 100% sure on the title. But I think it was called Love Bites, and it was a feminist werewolf game, and I remember reading through it. I found it really interesting and much more in line with my take on how I'd want to run or play or design a werewolf game. But that's a bit off topic, and neither here nor there. I can talk about that some other time. Basically, I just wanted to jump on stream, just chat for a bit, and say that I'm going to continue streaming. My schedule will hopefully be more regular going forward. And I'm going to talk more about, original IP stuff as well as what I'm finishing off. And lastly, I'm maybe going to run games. I've been running a lot of games recently, actually. I work for an NGO, and I do workshops, mostly Dungeons and Dragons, for teenagers and kids. And we, basically run games, but with a focus kind of on the writing aspect of it, and how playing games can turn you into a better writer, and kind of analyzing story elements and things. I mean, we don't nerd out about that stuff in particular. We play the D&D game, but as we're playing, I make sure to highlight the narrative and story elements, and to point out how they can incorporate this kind of thing in their own story. Because play is very interesting, because unique and dynamic actions, tasks, story elements appear in play that would not appear if you just sat down and wrote something. So how your character reacts, or how NPCs react, how the story develops, the choices you make, those are all organic, that through play, and you're going to come up with things in play that you just would not come up with just writing on your own. And that's not just the group dynamic that is generated by the play itself. So that's mostly what I do, kind of as as a day job, as it were. But I'm also planning on maybe running games either through my Patreon or through Start Playing Games. I've looked at Start Through Playing Games. It has kind of an interesting interface. Maybe there's some use there, but I think I'm going to go through my Patreon first there and see if I can put together some gaming groups, perhaps using the paid membership pool there. And then expand on that. I still plan on making all my posts on my Patreon, free, but obviously I'm going to keep the paid tiers as well, and see how that goes. As far as the books I'm writing on and creating in 2026, right now I've decided to put my main focus on the Camarilla book that I'm writing for the Storyteller's Vault. That's the Ivory Tower playing the Camarilla. I don't have a deadline on that exactly, because right now I think I'm really the only person on the team of writers who can really dedicate or focus time on that. I'm going to reconnect with my writing team this year and see what kind of how much time they can dedicate to working on it. If it's just me, that's fine. It's a lot of work, but I can do it. As the developer, primary author, you never want to do all the work yourself, but it is what it is, and thankfully we've already put in some good work on it. So the bones are there for the book. It just needs to be fleshed out, developed, edited, and then polished. So there's still a lot of work to do, but it's not. We're not starting from scratch or a blank page. It's definitely different than it was originally conceived. But that's okay. I think that is how things go, and I think it's going to be a great book. Past the Camarilla book, I have several Sabbat adventures that I've been working on. Specifically, I have Buried Beneath the Roots, which is, as I've said before, submitted. Just needs to be cleaned up and put into a publishable state. That's been taking me a bit longer than I'd hoped, unfortunately. Not just because of my Frozen Soldier, just because of some changes in the story I think needed to be made. And then I have Blood Clot, D'Abri on Tour. Yet again, that is some work that some of which has been submitted, but is in a much earlier state than Buried Beneath the Roots. Buried Beneath the Roots was basically completed. I could technically just publish it right now. It would just be very rough and not up to the standards we've set with the other two Sabbat adventures we've published, Lost in the Garden and Our Graves Are Empty, which I feel are very, very well received and at a very high level of quality. So I'd want the other adventures to at least meet the standards of those books, if not exceed them. And I'd say Blood Clot, yet again, like I said, that's not ready to go. That has a lot of work to do. Buried Beneath the Roots, as I could be published, but as I said, not at the level it is right now. So that just needs some work on my end as far as the editing, polishing, and getting it together. There's nothing wrong with the words and story in and of itself. It just can take a lot of work to get something to be exactly where you want it to be, even if the bones of the thing, the basics of it are good. That step from good to great, I feel there's a lot of work that goes from good to great. I think you can put something out that's good with a fair amount of work, but to get something that's great requires real attention to detail and to really kind of buff out the scratches, as it were, to use kind of a auto body reference. So beyond that, I do have other Sabbat adventures planned, but I don't know if it is viable for me to continue with that idea. There's several Sabbat adventures that we have the outlines for and have talked to people about writing, and that I've taken kind of shots at writing the kind of first drafts for as well. But we'll see about the viability of that, because putting out these adventures, like I said, it's a lot of work to get them from good to great, and I don't want to set any kind of something that I would consider subpar. I wouldn't want to put anything subpar out there as that's concerned. Yeah, I actually don't know if I can see my chat here. Maybe I can. Who knows? No, I don't want pop-ups. There we go. Okay, so it says I'm connected to the chat. Do I just type? Okay. Who knows? Who knows how this works? Not me. Event list. Oh, I see. Okay, I think I see how it works now. Maybe not. No. Oh, okay. Interesting. No. All right. Well, in any case, it is what it is. The chatting maybe doesn't work quite the way I want it to. It says the chat is there. Okay. So I click there. Who knows? All right. Anyway, doesn't really matter. So as far as I said, the Sabbat adventures, we, other than Buried Beneath the Brutes and Blood Clot, we have another one called Mortal Wounds, which was Salubri and Tremere focused. Almost not really, I'd say, a dungeon crawl, but definitely very location focused. Not a lot of traveling or moving about. Maybe more comparable to Our Graves Are Empty, as far as the fact that you're in a pretty small geographic location, and that it's a very focused adventure. I would say it's maybe more linear than the other adventures we have, so it would limit its replayability, but obviously it's dealing with a very focused topic anyway. So I assume that would that already makes it kind of a niche product as well. And we had plans for a kind of set of adventures that would be a scenario that's called Bitter Season, which is actually based on the LARP we ran in Los Angeles. But perhaps that would that is less likely to happen, I would say, because that would be a great deal of work, and I don't think we have the capacity or bandwidth to do that right now. So right now, I would say that the things that are on the table that are going to happen, that are in the pipeline, are the Ivory Tower Camarilla book, the Sabbat adventure Buried Beneath the Roots, and Blood Clot Dabru on tour. Beyond that, I don't know if there is going to be more books for the Storyteller's Vault. It really will depend on how those adventures are received, how the Ivory Tower book is received. If the Ivory Tower book is received very well, then perhaps we'll move on to more Camarilla-focused adventures. And produce a few of those. Perhaps the Bitter Season adventures could actually very easily be repurposed into Camarilla adventures as opposed to Sabbat adventures, simply because of the nature of those adventures. Um, they basically take place inside a Camarilla city that has recently fallen to the Sabbat, Los Angeles in particular. Um, but that could very easily become a series of adventures more about the fall of the Camarilla and the danger of the Sabbat. I guess that could be very easily like repurposed, and so your character's actions could basically decide whether the city falls or survives or becomes something new. So that could be interesting and fun to play through as well. Um, and But not very easily repurposed into obviously a Sabbat adventure. Um, I don't really think a adventure book along the lines of say like Under a Blood Red Moon, which is an old second edition adventure book from back in the day, which basically took place in Chicago. And I think the set piece of that adventure was the death of Lodin, um, the Prince of Chicago. And basically, you could either play as Camarilla vampires, Sabbat vampires, or werewolves in that adventure. Not a mix. Your group would have to be really composed of one of those three, uh, because like crossplay was really not really written into the World of Darkness. It became kind of a thing that people became more interested in. But crossplay wasn't really something that was encouraged in the World of Darkness. Still isn't, actually. Um, though I know in Chronicles of Darkness and New WoD there was some push for that. I believe it's called the Contagion Chronicles, which obviously a good name for that, considering a lot of people see crossplay as a contagion, as something like infecting another piece, as it were. Like what's your peanut butter doing in my chocolate? What's your werewolf doing in my vampire game? So Under a Blood Red Moon was kind of concept that was an adventure. It was pretty linear, but they were different set piece encounters depending upon what group from the World of Darkness you were playing, whether Camarilla, Sabbat, or Werewolf. But it also meant that the book itself, the audience for the book was limited because basically, if you were a Sabbat player, there was basically half of the book you couldn't use. Maybe even 2/3 of the book you couldn't use because it was Camarilla focused or werewolf focused, and that would be the same of whether you're a Camarilla or werewolf. I think probably the least use would be for werewolf players for that book. Hilariously, um, even though it's called Under a Blood Red Moon, and I believe it actually has a werewolf on the cover, if I remember correctly. And I believe the abomination rules are in that book originally about a werewolf who becomes a vampire, and how that works. I believe they have an example character, Pariah, the abomination, uh, who's I believe the first statted abomination in the World of Darkness, and basically what he's all about. And how abominations work and all that. So I think maybe that was part of the draw of that book was just the abomination rules. The kind of the hook, the mechanical hook, to make sure the storyteller at least was buying that book, even if the other people wouldn't be as interested in it because of its limited appeal. So I think just from that understanding, a adventure book that was could be Sabbat, could be Camarilla, would be less interesting for us. We do like to write adventures that are focused on a particular sect, because that way we can really streamline the adventures and the mechanics and the set piece encounters to what's thematically interesting for that sect. Obviously, for a Sabbat adventure per se, you want to focus on thematic elements that intersect with the Sabbat's religiosity, the deeper elements of the fight against the antediluvians, the sacrifice of humanity for these, kind of higher ideals, higher beliefs for vampiric survival and all that, and the inherent contradictions therein. While with a Camarilla adventure, we would probably want to focus more on the kind of political intrigue, and of course the infighting and backstabbing that is required for that. And obviously this kind of like detached from humanity, gated community kind of mindset that is in the Camarilla, what is often called this like siege mentality, where everyone is against us, but we, live this very privileged existence, and the like, violence, and just depraved acts that are required to create this, gated community and all that. I also like the kind of Cold War, the Cold War, Le Carre, spy dynamic, the intrigue there in the Camarilla, this kind of analog, old school mindset. They're not on the cutting edge. They're very stratified and ossified, and that keeps them safe on some level. But it's also more comfortable for the decrepit elders who are in charge of everything. They don't want things to be changed or to be on the bleeding edge, because that disempowers them. Because then they have to rely more on the younger generation to basically get along. They want things to be analog. They want things to be ossified, because that's what they're comfortable with. They're uncomfortable. They don't want to. They don't want things to change rapidly, and they don't want new technologies and ways of going about things becoming the norm. Simply because then their power is diminished, because then they can no longer control the levers of power directly. They have to rely on more and more intermediaries to get things done. And while the young in the Camarilla are valued, they're valued as kind of cogs or like grease for the wheels to churn the machine. They're not valued for their independent thought or their new ideas or anything like that. They're valued for their labor more than anything else. While obviously the elders are kind of like the capital class. They own everything. They don't do anything. They just own everything, and so all profit, as it were, accrues to them first and foremost, and everybody else gets table scraps and whatever falls on the floor. And I think the Camarilla is best exemplified by, not best exemplified, but I think the Glengarry Glen Ross comparison is best. The coffee is for closers kind of argument, that unless you're part of the like Nepo elite of the Camarilla, unless you're part of that class that basically was grandfathered into power, like you're the progeny of somebody important, you come from a bloodline that has power, and therefore, in a sense, you are given privileges and respect and easy money because you're related to someone who's, in. So therefore, it kind of honors them, your grandsire or sire or whatever, or shows how much power they have, that you, a nobody who's just embraced, also gets the benefit. So in a sense, that inherited wealth, that nepotism. So unless you're part of that class, that kind of privileged Nepo baby class, as it were, everybody else in the Camarilla basically has the coffee is for closers mentality, that you're constantly going to have to deliver and perform and make good, to get part of the spoils. That you're always earning, you're always closing, and that so ABC, always be closing. And if you're not closing, if you're not performing, if you're not delivering, even if last year you were at the top and receiving the accolades, whatever, you had the edge, to use kind of a card game jihad reference. You had the edge. Which is a kind of concept we're bringing back in the Camarilla book, actually. So if you had the edge, you were the hot new thing, you were on top, you were accruing all these advantages and accolades, but once you stop closing, once you stop delivering, Then once you lose the edge, then you're scrambling just like everybody else. So it's a very precarious lifestyle to remain within the Gilded Cage, unless you basically, I guess, dehumanize yourself, grovel, really get in the good graces of the privileged few. You make yourself indispensable to them on some level, so that you too can no longer be, working for scraps or like hunting around. So that, I think, is the kind of internal tension within the Camarilla that makes it an interesting place to play. Is that it's a cutthroat, dog eat dog world, but also it's basically you're fighting to stay in the house. And that outside the house is a much scarier prospect. To work basically the street is a much scarier prospect than to be in the climate controlled, guarded security of the gated community. Like, you have to basically do terrible things and fight for your life to stay within the gated community. But the prospect of actually having to fight on the street, like the Anarchs, Otarchus, and Sabbat do, basically just fighting for the scraps to stay alive, for not just for blood, but to stay off the radar of the hunters, the Second Inquisition, not to mention tangling with the other various monstrous things in the world of darkness, which for the most part you're somewhat protected from within the Camarilla. Then that's really where the fun play comes in, is that internal tension. And obviously we will also talk about the Ashira a little bit in the Ivory Tower, playing the Sabbat, playing the Camarilla, not playing the Sabbat. But that won't be the focus of the book. We are going to do a little piece like we did in the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, where we basically gave a little kind of sect outline of the Sabbat, and I think we did a sect outline of the. No, I think we just did a second outline of the Sabbat. In the character creation thing, we're going to do that with the Ashira, basically, where we'll give you a little sect outline, so you have a basic concept of the Ashira and the Ashira Camarilla Alliance and how that works. We're not going to dive deep into the Ashira. That would, I assume, would require a whole separate book. I feel that the Ashira as a sect is very interesting as this kind of nebulous concept that's brought in. I don't know if a lot would be gained by detailing them in a deep way. I don't know if I'm really the right person to do that. I mean, obviously, I have the cultural expertise, being Arab American myself. Grew up as a Muslim and all that. And obviously, I have the academic expertise with my graduate degree and my work, obviously with my graduate degree in international security policy, dealing with the Middle East, and the fact that I've worked with several think tanks, including the Middle East Institute and the rest. And 20 years of experience in the energy sector, mostly dealing with West Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. So yes, I do have all the qualifications, as it were, to write the Ashira book, I feel, but I don't know if there's a lot to be gained from such a book. I would feel not 100% comfortable putting that kind of work out there in an unofficial capacity, I guess. And I'm sure I would have blind spots that I'm not aware of when it comes to it, even with my level of expertise or whatnot. So I don't know if there really is the right writing group to put out such a book in an unofficial capacity. I feel if an official book was put out, perhaps a team could be put together that would be better and would have the resources behind it to really put something out of quality. I think if I was to put out such a book on an unofficial level, there would be very high expectations, but my resources that I could bring to bear would be limited because obviously I'm just an individual. I'm not a corporation. That is my main, I guess, concern with putting out like a quote unquote full Ashira book or detailing the Ashira in more detail than has already been given. I like kind of playing around with the edges with the Ashira. I think there's some interesting stuff to be done there. I've definitely written on the Ashira, both in the Camarilla book and in the Vampire's Player's Guide. Though I think a lot of the stuff I wrote for the Ashira and the Vampire's Player's Guide, the official V5 Vampire's Player's Guide, I believe a lot of that got like removed, put on the cutting room table floor, which makes sense. It's I don't think there's any plans to make an Ashira official source book. So I for my role as a writer to be a completionist, I mentioned and put in Ashira stuff. I think some of it did remain. Oddly enough, specifically in the Caitiff sections I wrote, but a lot of the other stuff did not, which is fine by me. I have no complaints there. But I think that playing around the edges with the Ashira is fun, and the stuff that I've written about the Ashira, basically the main point I wanted to put forward is that the Ashira is no more kind of like an Islamic sect of vampires than the Camarilla is a Christian sect of vampires, right? So while the Camarilla came about mostly from Western and Southern Europe, it's kind of a Roman origination supposedly, and then kind of really came into its own during the kind of post-Roman medieval period. It is not like a Catholic sect of vampires, right? Obviously, the Sabbat actually could make more of an argument of being Catholic vampires than the Camarilla could, because the Sabbat actually uses Catholic nomenclature and titles for its positions of higher power. Bishop, archbishop, priest, so on and so forth. But the Camarilla obviously was growing up and establishing power in Christian Europe. It had some elements obviously in North Africa, the Middle East, and so on, but its kind of central core of power was in what we would call Christian Europe. But that wouldn't make the Camarilla a Christian sect, right? No one would conceive of the Camarilla as a Christian sect, though obviously its origin myths that are most prevalent are biblical, Cain and Abel and all that. It has a lot of elements that are somewhat tied to Christianity, I guess, but it's not a Christian sect at heart. So the Ashira, I would say, the same thing. So its origin point, where it started, is in the Middle East, and is at the kind of birth of Islam. So in a sense, it is it seemed like there was kind of there were younger groupings of vampires, but it was really the instigation of Lasombra, actually, who brought these groups of vampires together in a broader community, which would become the Ashira, and it was in the post-Islam, I shouldn't say post-Islam, in the Middle East after Islam came about. So it is a sect that started, and its heartland is in the Muslim Middle East, but I don't know if I would call it an Islamic sect, right? That's not really the core of it, I would say. The core of it is that it's, vampires who've come together. And their main feeding source and where they're getting their, quote-unquote recruits from, obviously, is Muslim Europe. So, obviously, the flavoring of the sect and what it's about would be Muslim, but I wouldn't go so far to call it a Muslim sect. As I've said in the, I believe in the Camarilla book, the official Camarilla book, just as in the Camarilla, the kind of carrier wave of the Camarilla was Christian Europe. Where Christian Europe went, the Camarilla followed. right? So when Christian Europe, as it were, or expanded into North Africa or Eastern Europe and so on, or into the Americas, that's probably the best example. When Christian Europe came to America, the Camarilla followed, right? The Camarilla wasn't here in North America before Christian Europe came. There were probably vampires in North America. There were vampires in South America, of various origins, who knows. But the Camarilla as a sect didn't come until the Christian invaders came, right? That didn't make the Camarilla a Christian sect. They simply came with the Christian invaders. They carried on top of it. They were, as I said, that's the carrier wave. So the same with the Ashira. So the Ashira isn't necessarily an Islamic sect, but wherever Islam went, or Muslim, mortal power groups went, the Ashira would follow, because they had infiltrated those mortal institutions, right? That is the main thing. So they use that as a carrier wave. They themselves weren't necessarily like Muslim vampires any more than the Camarilla are, Christian vampires, right? I feel on some level what you see is this kind of like a Western European or even, I guess, more of American mindset, where Europe is unreligious. There's no like religion associated with Europe in particular from an American perspective, right? They're kind of almost, Europeans are almost seen as like purely atheistic almost. This like kind of, when you talk about Europeans, you don't really talk about them as like Christian Europeans, at least from an American perspective, unless you're like a white identitarian or something, or some kind of supremacist usually. But most of Europe is Christian. France is mostly Catholic. If you look at their holidays, it's just like one Christian holiday after another. I mean, in France, like there's so many Christian Catholic feast days, it's kind of mind-boggling. So Christianity is deeply embedded in those cultures and places, but that's not really the perspective from an American perspective. Because obviously in America there's a very Protestant evangelical kind of mindset and ethos. So the more kind of like reserved Christianity of Europe, doesn't really meet the criteria of like being Christian, I guess, in America, at least from an American perspective. And I'm not making any judgments. I'm simply saying, as someone who grew up in America, that's really the viewpoint. So there's kind of this mindset that Europe is atheistic, a-religious, that they've reached this kind of like Western ideal of being kind of above religiosity. And then the Middle East, Africa, all that are very religious places, that they're basically governed by Islamic mores, and that all of their failings can basically be blamed on, Islam and backwardness. While all of Europe's failings, whenever Europeans get something wrong, it has nothing to do with Christianity. It's just, a fluke. It happened. It was a mistake, whatever. Any failings in Europe aren't blamed on some broader meta reason of their religion or their culture, right? That kind of judgment is reserved for the Middle East and Africa. It's their culture, it's their religion that causes their failings, and whenever they get something right, it's because of some inroads of Western thought or liberalism or whatever. So that is kind of the framing that we see from a Western and especially American perspective. And I feel that's really the danger in framing the Ashira as an Islamic sect, especially when we don't frame the Camarilla as a Christian sect, right? Is that we're basically ascribing to this sect religious mores or beliefs or whatever, just because that is the framing that we put upon the Middle East and North Africa more broadly. That everything there is explained by religion or culture, which is not the standard we use when we talk about Europe and America, right? We don't blame everything that's wrong in America on the fact that America is Christian or that it's a capitalist economy or anything like that. That's changing a bit, but it's really not the default, right? Anything that happens in America, when things go wrong in America, it's a fluke, it's an aberration. it's not a symptom of greater systemic problems, is the way it's portrayed in our media. And so I feel that is the danger of basically pigeonholing the Ashira as a Islamic Muslim sect, and kind of giving the Camarilla a pass for its, Christian roots in a sense. So I prefer to talk about them as sects that have basically penetrated local institutions where they originated from. In the case of the Camarilla, that would basically be, church. Originally it would have been like, the political centers of power when the Camarilla originated would have been, Catholic institutions basically, and so they penetrated, infected, as it were, co-opted those institutions. And as they became more of there was a more feudal system in place in mortal society, they infiltrated those feudal systems. And those feudal systems obviously were monarchies based upon a belief in divine power, Christian divine power of kings, right? So they were infiltrating those institutions. And so they followed those institutions wherever they went, and basically rode them as a carrier wave to wherever they went geographically, to then basically corrupt, co-opt, and exploit where those places had power. The same would be the case with the Ashira. The Ashira originated in the Middle East, so they co-opted, corrupted Islamic institutions, because those were the not only religious power centers, but the political power centers at the time. And so they would follow wherever Islamic power reached. They would follow along. So that's where the Ashira would go. And that would include not just, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, but obviously it would include parts of Europe, and parts of, the Americas as well, especially in the modern setting. And in the modern setting, I'd say, because of the way the geopolitics of the world are now, that's less of an issue. Now, with such a global world, with air travel and virtual communication and all that, the Ashira, in a sense, no longer needs to follow the carrier wave of Islam any more than the Camarilla needs to basically go where a new church has been set up, right? They can basically co-opt institutions wherever they want, by sending their proxies to those places under whatever false pretenses they want, usually using kind of corporate institutions, trade, capitalism, that kind of thing. So I'd say a good touch point for the Ashira-Camarilla alliance is basically the relationship you have between the Gulf states. That's obviously, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Oman, all that. What is known as the Gulf Cooperation Council, the JCC. Basically, it's a group of kind of like co-opted subsidiary states to Saudi Arabia. They're very rich. But they're very small, isolated cantons, except for Saudi Arabia, obviously, that really depend upon the West through Saudi Arabia to the West, and to a smaller part of Saudi Arabia, I should say, to basically ensure their sovereignty, just as we saw with Kuwait during the 1990s Iraq War, or what's called the Gulf War, where basically Kuwait was invaded and basically abolished by Iraq. But we guaranteed Kuwait sovereignty. We reestablished Kuwait as a country, because all those little Gulf states were created to basically enclose rich oil resources and deny them from larger, more politically independent states. That's just the way it was. There's a reason that Kuwait. There's like Kuwait and Qatar and all these like itty bitty states have these massive oil resources that dwarf even a much larger state like, say, Iraq, or even Iran, let alone Syria, which was basically had any oil near it basically totally ripped off from it. Well, I actually have to go, so I'll talk to you all later.